So, first of all, Tami and I can't see you and we can't hear you. We just see each other in our lovely faces. So if throughout the presentation today you have a technical issue, put that in chat. Wendy's also here, our amazing marketing manager. She'll be monitoring the chat. If you can't see us, you can't hear us, something like that, put that in chat. If you have a question for Tami or me about your estate planning stuff, but mostly about Tami's dementia, all of that stuff, put that in the Q&A because I'll be asking her some questions later, your questions. We want to make sure we address everyone's questions today. So put that in the Q&A, technical issues in the chat. Let's see, we're recording. All right, excellent. So let me introduce Tami today. She's our expert today. Now, Tami is a dementia consultant. She's an educator, a speaker, and she's provided counseling services, dementia guidance, emotional support, and care strategies to families and professional dementia caregivers for more than 30 years. I'm telling you, she is an expert. And just personally, Tami has also, we have personal connection. I have known Tami for probably at least 10 years, at least. She helped our family with all of the same stuff. When my grandmother was diagnosed with dementia and all the way through the late stage Alzheimer's until she passed away, and then helping my grandpa deal with all of the aftermath of, you know, how as a caregiver do you deal with all of that after the fact. So I know Tami, I love Tami, she's great. And she's also wrote this amazing book, which I'm sure she'll talk about, but I've read it and I'm like, oh, I wish we would have had this 10 years ago, right? Of course, Tami, just too late. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to pass the torch over to Tami. She's going to do a short presentation with everyone. And then I already have a list of questions that people have sent in, my own questions. And then as you guys are going through all of this, again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. So Tami, take it away.
All right, Maggie, thank you so much for that nice introduction. And it was such a pleasure to have your dad in my support group. As a matter of fact, at some point when he couldn't drive anymore, the support group was so important to him. So I would go and pick him up and bring him to the support group and then drive him home. So thank you again for having me as your guest.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking forward to this. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen so I can pull up my PowerPoint and make sure everybody can see it. Everybody see it?
Yes, I can see it, which means everyone else can see it.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so today I am going to talk about how to communicate with people with dementia. And I'm going to get started really quick, just give you a brief overview, real brief overview about what dementia is. Dementia is a general term used to describe people with cognitive impairment that interferes with daily living. So the cognitive impairment has to be severe enough that it's interfering with all different activities of daily living. What you need to know about most dementias, there's over 100 different types of dementia, Alzheimer's being the one we hear about the most. So dementia is an umbrella term, like cancer is an umbrella term, and there's umpteen million cancers. So dementia is an umbrella term for cognitive impairment. What you need to know about dementias is they are a progressive physiological degenerative brain disease, and currently there's no cure. So it means that the brain cells are going to die over time, and it's progressive. Some go quicker than others, and this is the hard thing. We can never tell how quickly somebody's going to progress.
And that means it's not getting better, right, Tami?
Correct. It does not get better. Yep. And then a lot of people think dementia is, well, if my loved one doesn't have memory loss, then they don't have dementia. So I'm going to set the record straight on that dementia affects more than just memory. It affects language, reasoning, thinking, processing information, problem solving, judgment, mobility, executive functioning, and visual spatial perception. So what you need to know is how is dementia going to affect the brain is going to affect how people and how you're going to communicate with people with dementia. So I'm going to go through what the disease does to the brain that causes communication challenges. Dementia causes short-term memory loss. People with dementia aren't going to remember things that were said or done minutes or seconds ago. You need to know it also causes increased confusion. They will confuse the past with the present, and they'll have difficulty reading and writing. And they are eventually not going to have the ability to think rationally, and they're going to lose the ability to process information logically. That is super important to know. And this is not something that they're doing intentionally. Everything I'm talking about today is because dementia is causing these problems and challenges. They will fixate, ruminate, or repeat things over and over. As a matter of fact, this is one of the things that depletes the caregiver's energy more than anything, is dealing with that repetitiveness, which we'll talk about. Then they do lose the ability to censor or filter the things they say and do, which means that they will just blurt out whatever's on their mind. Sometimes they say very hurtful things, embarrassing things, things that are insulting, that are inappropriate. This is not intentional. Again, this is a result of dementia deteriorating the brain cells. So it's important. The brain is the communication hub. So if our cells are not communicating to one another, we run into problems. And this is what is often the result of a brain that is being attacked by dementia. And then they'll be having problems with problem solving and following directions. Your mother could have cooked a recipe, the same recipe for 30, 40 years, and now all of a sudden can't follow the directions. And poor judgment, this is where elder abuse they're super vulnerable because they often have very poor judgment, and they will get scammed very easily. And then they will become argumentative, accusatory, and or combative. They will become argumentative if you disagree with them, if you challenge them and try to correct them, because they truly believe what their brain is telling them. They will become accusatory when they go and hide things. They don't remember where they hid it, and they will accuse you of stealing it or misplacing it or hiding it from them. And then they're also going to become very combative. We see this around personal hygiene the most. When they don't understand what you're doing, we all have this instinct. It's all innate. And what happens if somebody comes towards you and you feel threatened? We're going to get combative. We're going to protect ourselves. It's no different for people with dementia. The problem is they don't understand what you're doing. They feel threatened, and therefore they're reacting. It's not you doing something intentionally wrong. It's the brain misperceiving what is being done, and they'll get combative to protect themselves. All of this, the person with dementia has no control over whatsoever. So it's important to understand what's happening to the brain in order for us to understand and know how to communicate with them. Next, I'm going to go over communication pitfalls, things you want to avoid doing if possible. I don't expect you to be perfect. I just want you to be more aware of things to try to avoid doing. You want to avoid arguing, rationalizing, correcting, and explaining to them. They believe what their brain is telling them. You argue, rationalize, correcting is going to make them argumentative. And furthermore, it's going to exhaust you to no end. You also want to avoid trying to be right or proving a point. Whatever their brain thinks is what their brain thinks. Being forceful, you want to avoid being forceful or insistent that they do it your way. The more insistent, the more forceful, the more likely they're going to push back. You also want to avoid discussing upsetting topics. I have this rule of thumb. If they don't ask, don't share. If they do ask, share very little. And you want to avoid asking open-ended questions. Very difficult to answer open-ended questions when the brain is progressively deteriorating. It's malfunctioning. And what happens if you ask an open-ended question, it points out and it gets them very frustrated. They can't answer it. So we just try to avoid doing that altogether. And then you want to not ask why or do you remember. Assume they don't know why. Assume they're not going to remember. Because again, as the disease progresses, short-term memory loss, they're not going to know why, and they are most likely not going to remember. If they do, it's a fluke. And it's like a circuit board. Every once in a while, the circuits may connect, but it's not the standard. It's not going to be the norm. It's a fluke. So save your time and energy, avoid asking why, and reminding them, do they remember? Do not remind them that they forget. That's sort of like pouring salt into a wound. They have a brain disease. Their brain is malfunctioning. What is the point of pointing out that they don't remember? That can be perceived as being very hurtful. It's not your intentions, but they have a brain disease. So why point out to them that they forgot? Avoid rushing them. If you ever want to slow down a person with dementia, rush them. They will go even slower. They don't like to be rushed. As a matter of fact, a lot of my dementia clients have this ritual they have to go through before they get out of the house. So if you have a doctor's appointment, start the process 2 or 3 hours before that appointment. Rushing them makes them very agitated, makes them very anxious, and they can become very argumentative. And this, taking what they say personally, please know they aren't saying and doing things to hurt you intentionally. This is the most difficult thing that caregivers have to learn to do, is not take what their loved one says personally. Remind yourself, I have this dementia mantra. Every time you think you're going to take what the loved one says personally, I want you to start saying, dementia is causing my loved one to say and do these things. Dementia is causing my loved one to say and do these things. At some point, your brain will shift over and you'll realize that it's dementia causing everything that you and your loved one are going through, and it'll help to detach a little bit better. So what are some ways to communicate with people with dementia? Listen, listen, and listen. All forms of behavior are a way of communicating something, communicating a need. So we need to listen better to what are they telling us. And once we hear what they're telling us, we need to validate that we hear them. They need to feel heard and understood. So we need to paraphrase, repeat back to them using their same words what you hear them telling you. And then we need to provide an empathetic response, a response that's reassuring and comforting. A lot of times there's themes to what they're asking. And if we understand what the themes are, then we'll know how to respond in a comforting, reassuring way. You also want to pay attention to body language. According to the Alzheimer's Association, 55% of communicating with a person with dementia is in our body language, 38% is our tone of voice, and 7% is words. Now, it works both ways. A person with dementia can change on a dime based on our body language, our facial expressions, or our tone of voice. But I also want you to start learning their body language, because as they lose the ability to communicate verbally, I want you to start reading what their body language is communicating to you. Because when they can't communicate directly verbally, you'll know what a frown means. You'll know what a certain posture means. So start learning their body language so it can help you as this disease progresses. Also, you want to replace saying you. When you say you to a person with dementia, it sounds very punitive, and you want to replace it by saying we and us. It's time for us to take our medication. It's time for us to go to bed. It's time for us to have breakfast versus you. Us and we increases cooperation, and it gives them a sense of belonging. They're not alone, that we're doing something together. And you want to keep your questions and answers short and simple. The shorter, the better. The simpler, the better. Because again, as the disease progresses, they lose that ability to process information. And so the less you say, the better. The easier it is on them and you. And instead of asking open-ended questions, you want to give them two choices. We really want to still give them a sense of independence, but we're going to make it simpler. Do you want to wear the green shirt or the blue shirt? Do you want eggs or cereal for breakfast? They still have a part in the decision making, but we're simplifying the decision making, and we have to provide them with the two sources. We can't wait. What would you like to do today? Very complicated, very difficult for people. Do you want to go for a walk? You want to go for a drive to the ocean? Two choices. Provide verbal cues as well as visual cues. As this disease progresses, they lose the verbal. They can't process. But there are universal signs we know. A stop sign, we all know what a stop sign is. will trigger the brain. We see somebody sitting on a toilet. Toileting gets very, very difficult as this disease progresses. So sometimes over the toilet seat, we put a picture of a person getting up and on and off a toilet, and we put restroom on the door for the toilet. So you may want to start using visual cues to help to see if the brain can register what it is you're trying to ask them to do. And you want to speak slower. It takes people longer to process information when they have dementia. And you want to make eye contact. If they're standing, you stand. If they're sitting, you sit at their level, make eye contact with them. They need to see your face. They need to be able to have that contact. So if you're asking somebody with dementia to do something and your back is turned to them and or their back is turned to you, you want to make sure you get in front of them. And as this disease progresses, there might come a point where you also want to say who you are. Hi, George, my name is Tami, or it's Tami, good to see you. You've got to make that eye contact. And then you want to start breaking things down. So dressing, showering, bathing become hugely complicated. And when I was writing my book, I wanted to go through all the steps that it took for bathing. And there's like 40 to 50 steps if you really break it down. So we have to take one step at a time and communicate with them or do the activity with them one step at a time. We can't now say things really quick. Okay, it's time for us to take a shower. It's time for you to go in there and change your clothes. Way too much information. We're going to have to walk through this step by step with them as this disease progresses. And one step at a time, create success at that first step, then add the second step. If we get stuck at the first step, now we've got to be creative and figure out ways to assist them in the process. And then compliment them. Every single one of us, brain disease or no brain disease, like compliments. And if you're really struggling to get your loved one to do something, or they're very upset, compliments go a long way. And when in doubt, if you think you're just going to lose it, your patience is run thin, which happens, just excuse yourself, go into the other room, scream, yell, do whatever you have to do, collect yourself, and then come back. But I give you permission to walk away anytime you think you're just going to lose it or you're so frustrated. And walk away, though, also means make sure that your loved one is safe. We don't want to walk away and their safety is in jeopardy. So these are a lot of communication tips. And whenever I do a presentation, I always like to end with a quote. So I know everybody's mics are off, but I'd love for us to read this next quote all together. And then we'll pick up where we left off. Okay, Maggie? Okay, on 3. 1, 2, and 3. Peace is the result of retraining your mind to process life as it is, rather than as you think it should be. And on behalf of your loved ones and myself, I would like to thank all of you for the love, the care, and the support you provide day in and day out. Okay. All right, Maggie, let me come back.
Yeah, that was really great. I'm having flashbacks of all of these scenarios, and I remember at times how frustrating it was. And then I'm thinking all of these tips would be really helpful for my toddler. Like
they do.
Kind of feels like very similar things. The giving them 2 options, right? Yep. You're going to go crazy if they're not going to be able to explain what you want to do today or what we're going to wear. It's the same battle, but in reverse. I remember all of this. So
yeah, yep.
All right, you guys, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A answer. And then somebody actually, Tami, had asked you for resources in Lincoln, the Lincoln, California area. Suzanne Stewart says her mom knows you, Judy, and she says hi. And she said she saw you at her brother's funeral. And so I'm going to ask Wendy to put Tami's email address and contact information in the chat. So if you guys you want specific resources, or you want Tami to come and talk to you and do some, intake or something like that, you can reach out to Tami directly. So if you guys have any questions about, communicating with dementia patients or anything like that, feel free to put it in the Q&A box. And somebody had sent in some questions, Tami, so I'm going to ask those questions. So I think the biggest question everyone has is, how do you deal with the repetitive, constant question over and over and over again? Like, I have answered this question at least 100 times today,
Yes.
What do you do when you have said it over and over again? Like, why aren't they getting it? Why do I have to keep saying this over and over again?
Yeah. So what tends to happen, and I'm seeing more and more, the more engaged their brain is, the less we see this repetitiveness. But when their brain is bored, B-O-R-E-D, they tend to ruminate and obsess on, or I call it looping. And what you need to know, though, I want you to all start thinking about, remember earlier I said there's themes to things they may repeat over and over and over again. Are they worried about something? Are they concerned about something? Are they sharing something pain? Are they too hot? Are they too cold? In other words, this is why I want you to listen better, because listen to see what the themes are, because now once we know what the themes are, you're going to come up with some pat answers that we use interchangeably. So one generic pat answer I use often is, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Thank you for letting me know that's how you feel. We have to validate them always. If you try to dismiss it, I've told you this a million times, they're going to get very frustrated, and it fuels that looping even more. So there's like a 3-step process. Validate first. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Or, I'm sorry this is upsetting you. I'm sorry this is frustrating. And then we have to provide a reassuring, comforting response. And that reassuring, comforting response is, I'll take care of the problem. I'll resolve whatever's bothering you. And then immediately you want to massage that into redirecting their attention and get them to talk about things they enjoy or do things they enjoy. But you need to know the repetitive questions serve a purpose. And they're repeating and they're stuck on a loop because it's something that's really important or bothering them. And when we understand that, we validate, reassuring, comforting response. It's got to be step 1, step 2. If you skip over the validating, they're still going to ruminate. Now, is it going to get rid of the problem? Probably not. But the more engaged their brain is. So I tested this theory out actually with a client. She kept calling her loved one. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. Bored to death. We figured, you know what, the care community, she's higher functioning, probably wasn't providing enough stimulation. So we moved her to a different care community, a lot more stimulation. And she's only called once to say she wanted to go home in the last 2 months. So there is something about keeping that brain engaged and busy, right? So that the cylinders are still firing to the best of their ability versus being bored. What do I do with myself? My brain is malfunctioning. Now what do I do? And it gets stuck on these loops. So validate, reassuring, comforting response, redirect. But first, listen and pay attention to what the theme might be.
All right, Tami, we have a question. Do you have any experience with the IHSS in-home services?
I don't, and you would want to contact them directly.
Yeah. And Phil, call Deidre at the office. Deidre is our geriatric care manager here at the office, and she does have some information about it, and so she would be able to help with that. And I'm going to ask Wendy to give you her contact information. All right.
Great.
So Pat says, my mom has just about no short-term memory anymore.
Yeah.
But she can carry on a conversation about just about any topic with clarity. And the interesting thing to me is that she makes up the answers when she doesn't know what the actual answer is. So for example, if I say, what's the weather like? She doesn't go outside. She's usually in bed all day. She'll just make up an answer. And she doesn't know what season it is. So sometimes the answers are really funny and totally out there.
Yes. Is that something that bothers her, or you just accept that's just the way it is?
It sounds like she's just accepting,
Yep. That's the new norm.
Sharing is caring.
Yep. Exactly.
And that is pretty common. I remember that situation too. you'd have this logical, remember this story, and then the story would just just a divergent,
Yeah.
like I'm just going to make up a fact that wasn't really there and then go back on with my story. So I remember those days too.
Yeah. And what you need to know, that's normal behavior for somebody with dementia. And we just go with them. I call it swim by their side, walk by their side. We just go with them as long as they're not in any danger. That's the piece, right? You're going to pick your battles. And this was one you don't even need to pick. You just go with them.
Great, Mom. Yeah, it's knowing. You're right. Good.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any medical treatments to slow the advance of dementia or Alzheimer's? I mean, I know you're not a doctor, but you're in it. You're sitting in it.
Yeah, no, I mean, they have Aricept, they have certain medications they give people, Aricept, Namenda, the Echelon patch, to try to slow the progression. There's nothing that's going to cure it at this time. It might slow the progression, and there again, everybody's different, right? So physiologically, some respond better than others, and it's really individual, but those are the three main ones that they give out, that they prescribe to try to slow the progression. Namenda is one they give though in middle stage. It's not one I just learned that they give early stage. Aricept is one they'll give early stage. Namenda is when they're more farther along.
I would also like to point out, this is a good time for me to point this out, Tami,
Yes.
that this is a really great time to make sure that your loved ones, as they start to get into dementia, have the powers of attorney, have the healthcare power of attorney, because you're going to be more involved in their medical care, because they're not going to be able to, not only are they not going to want, they're just not going to want to go to the doctor at that point. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. And so you're going to have to be the one that's having these conversations with the doctor, with them, without them. And you can't do that if you don't have the power of attorney. The doctors aren't going to release these medical tests. So you need to have the documents in place. So if you know someone who's going with them, make sure that you have all these documents in place, because it's going to not be very helpful when they're not going to go and there's nothing you can do about it, right?
Yeah, Maggie, I want to jump on that too. And so here's the other thing everybody has to remember. If your parents have a trust and the person with dementia is the trustee, we want to take the parent with dementia off as trustee, and we have to put someone in who does have capacity. So these are really important legal things to do, because if you don't do these things that Maggie's mentioning and I'm mentioning, you think this disease is bad enough being on this journey, not having your affairs in order and having somebody with dementia be the trustee, successor trustee, is a disaster. So, and if the POA isn't in place, POA, power of attorney for medical or financial, is another disaster, because you will not be able to do things on their behalf that they can no longer do themselves. And we have to get somebody responsible to oversee and manage their finances now and manage their healthcare decisions, because they're not going to be in a place to be able to do either one of those.
Right. And the great thing is having a Tami as a resource, having us as a resource, because we can come up with strategies where we can still make them feel like they have some financial autonomy, but they're also not giving away all of their assets. So for example, one of the things we did with my grandma, who was a shopper, right? She had her credit cards. We just canceled all the credit cards, or we gave her like a credit card that had a very low limit. So it felt like she could still spend some money, but she wasn't getting hoodwinked into spending all of these things or going to the bank or whatnot. So
exactly,
you can still do things to make them feel like they're being heard. They still have some control, but we're not letting them, buy something in Africa, for example.
Exactly, because they'll spend money left and right. There's a card called TrueLink that you can put a very limited amount of money on, and you can keep an eye on it. So that's again, there's lots of strategies on how to work around what we need to do that's in their best interest. The problem with that is a lot of caregivers feel like I'm sneaking behind their back, I'm betraying them, and you're not doing any of those. What you're really doing is these are all acts of love and compassion, because you're in a position as a caregiver to have to make these decisions on their behalf that they can no longer do themselves. So look at it as a form of love, compassion, and care, rather than betrayal and sneaking behind their back. They don't understand what it is they need, but we have to provide what is necessary to protect them.
Agreed. Okay, we have a couple of other questions.
Okay.
My mom seems to stutter now, and I have no idea what she's talking about. And usually I either pretend to understand and talk about the show she's watching, or I laugh and I feel rude. Is it rude that I'm doing that?
No, that's actually a great thing to do. A lot of times we just shake our head, right? And again, maybe start paying attention to her body language and her, whatever the mumble, right? We could listen to the tone of voice if it's, you'll know if she's angry or she's happy, but that's the right thing to do, is to go along with them. You don't have to understand it to show I'm here and I hear you and I support you. And you don't have to repeat anything other than, oh, okay. Yeah, sometimes that's all I say too. Like, oh, thank you for letting me know that. Oh, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I had no idea. And a lot of times I'll mirror, especially if it's a positive mood or they're saying something and they're smiling. And if I see them a little tense or angry, then I'll just say, wow, I can see that really concerns you. And my facial expression will change in showing an interest in them, that I can hear this is very upsetting for you, and then provide that reassurance.
Okay, here's a good one.
Oh boy.
Everyone feels this way. I know you do. How do I convince someone with dementia to stop driving? And here's the answer. You don't. There's no way you can convince them to stop driving. You can't.
Yeah. It's a gift when the person with dementia says, I want to stop driving. The reality is 95%, 98% will refuse to give it up. First of all, realize it's an independence issue, right?
100%.
This is the very last thing.
100%.
Yeah. So in my book, actually, I have a section on just dealing with 11 of the most challenging behaviors, driving being one of them. We tend not to like the caregiver to be, or family members to be, the person. Report it to the doctor, what your concerns are. We'd like the doctor or the attorney, some authority figure to be the person to notify the DMV, and you're not the bad guy, and let the person with dementia hate the doctor, be mad at the DMV, but that you're not the one responsible for doing this, because they will very much unlikely give it up. So report your observations, your concerns to the doctor. Doctor, I think by law, is supposed to when they know someone has dementia, they report it, and they do have to report that to the DMV.
Yeah, and there, just so everyone knows, there is a way that you can write a confidential letter to the DMV. So they're not allowed to say, oh, by the way, your son, your daughter, your spouse, send us a letter. Please come and retake your test. I mean, I sent it as the attorney, because guess what? I'm an attorney, and I know all of you aren't an attorney. But that way, what'll happen is the DMV will ask for a doctor's note. So if the doctor doesn't do it and you're concerned, you send in this confidential information letter, the DMV will say, we need a letter from your doctor that says you can still drive. And the doctor will say yes, they'll say no. If they say yes, then the DMV will still say, we need you to come in and take a test. We want you to take a test, not a written test, but an actual driving test. And this has really happened. So when this happened to my grandma, I wrote the letter, the doctor said she could still drive. And we were like, you are crazy. So she took the test, and we were all sitting there watching. She drove out, and within about 5 minutes, they just circled back in and sat in the parking lot. And most of their meeting was just sitting in the parking lot explaining why she was no longer allowed to drive. DMV sent a very nice letter that actually said, because of your dementia diagnosis, we're taking away your license. She looked at it and was like, and she didn't drive anymore, right? Yeah. And again, have an authority figure, someone else be the responsible one, and don't try to convince them they can't drive anymore. No. But let me tell you, and Maggie, piggyback off of me on this. I had it happen to a family I was working with, that if the family members are aware that your loved one has cognitive impairment and they get into an accident, you all are now liable to be sued for being aware
that your loved one had an accident.
I was going to say that is where you guys are on a slippery slope, because you all know when they should not be driving, right? You don't want to get to the point where you're too afraid, you don't want the fight, it's too difficult, or whatever the reason is, because if you know and you didn't do anything, then you guys can get into trouble too. And the last thing you want to do is cause an accident. I mean, you don't want to send this person out into the world knowing that they can't see left, they can't see right, they end up in a different city. That's happened. That happened in our family too. You know, and it was just happened to be a nice man at the gas station. You know, East Palo Alto, my great grandma's in East Palo Alto at a gas station, and someone said, hey, she doesn't know where she's at, she can't get home, right? That was lucky, you know, that was a lucky one. And so you guys have a duty to do that. And if you still don't want to write the letter, you still don't want to come, you can just, unconnect the battery.
Yes.
The car doesn't work. I'll take it into the shop. I'll get around to that. It's on my to-do list. It's always, it's always there. They're not going to remember. They just can't start the car, right? So there's other ways you can get around it.
We disable the car. We take the battery out of the key fob. We may ask a relative to come and borrow the car, but there are a lot of ways around it. But arguing with them and trying to tell them they need to stop driving, oh boy, that you're going to really, it just is an unpleasant situation. And then the person with dementia, believe it or not, they have short-term memory loss, but boy, oh boy, they're still going to be angry at you for even, mentioning that I can't drive. It's amazing sometimes what they do hang on to and can remember, even though they have short-term memory loss. Right.
Of course.
And then a lot of times too, if you do get an argument, they will forget, but you won't, and you're still fuming. So let's just simplify this and not put you in the hot seat.
And that goes back to don't take it personally, right? It's hard not to, though.
It's brutal. It is brutal.
So I have so many other questions. Okay. Question. What do you do when somebody is in denial? Right? Okay. I am fine. I don't need to go to the doctor. Or the caregiver's in denial. It's not as bad. I can't get mom or dad to take mom or dad to the doctor. We're not talking about it. It's getting worse. They're not dealing with it. How do you start the process of just getting them to go, getting the diagnosis? What do you say to get them to do that?
Okay, so I hear two parts to the question. The first part is, if we're dealing with the person with dementia, it's not denial anymore. I call it, there's a term called anosognosia. 60 to 80% of people with dementia do not have the awareness, lack the awareness, because the dementia is affecting the front lobe and the side lobe where self-awareness is. So 60 to 80% of people with dementia have anosognosia. People who are aware of it will often express a concern they have, but so we don't convince them and just consider it's dementia, it's not denial. Now we have another issue where the spouse, let's say, will be the one who wants to cover up for the parent who does have dementia. And then a couple angles we can take. One is really, as a matter of fact, I have a section of this in my book called spousal resistance, caregiver spousal resistance. So a couple angles. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll present the information to the caregiver spouse, the non-dementia spouse, and say, I went to this informative or this educational workshop and I heard A, B, C, and D. Do you notice if mom or dad has any of these symptoms? Or are you noticing any of these things? You keep a log, and I'm going to keep a log, and let's compare notes down the road, right? It's a non-threatening way. The other thing is to talk about, if you can get the spouse to talk about their concerns in terms of what would it be like to think that mom or dad has dementia? What would that mean? Often there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of guilt, a lot of responsibility. So this is where you can ask open-ended questions. You and dad have been together for so long. I can imagine it must be hard or very sad, or are you concerned? Open-ended questions. If we come at them aggressive, assertive, then again, that's just going to fuel the resistance. But the resistance serves a purpose. And if we understand the purpose it serves, then I'll know how to break it down. So be more I guess more like an investigator, a detective. Let's see what your spouse is thinking. Like, I noticed mom the other day. Have you noticed that, dad? No, I haven't. Well, I've been noticing it, and there might be some other things going on. So I'll just bring to your attention, and maybe you can just kind of keep an eye on things, but it has to be very reciprocated.
Okay, so the second part of that is, okay, we've all agreed we've got an issue, right?
Yeah.
But how do I convince the person who has dementia to see the problem, Tami? Why don't they see there's a problem? How do I get them to see it? Or how do I get them to the doctor so the doctor can get them to see it?
Okay, Maggie, let's have you answer that first since you've been through it.
Yeah, they don't see it. They're never going to see it. And you're just going to hit your head against the wall and get mad and angry and frustrated because they don't understand, and they're driving you crazy because they don't get it, right? You can't convince them of otherwise. And to get them to the doctor, you don't tell them they're going to the doctor.
Yep.
You just say, hey, guess what?
Yep.
I got to run an errand. Do you want to come with me? Or we're going for an errand. And you get them in the car and you take them to the doctor, and they're going to say no. They're going to say, I don't want to go. And then they'll just go. The funny thing about dementia and Alzheimer's is they will just go and they will say something different, right? That happened. And I'm going to ask this question next, but one of the resources that we did for my grandpa to give him a break, right? Because he was the caregiver and he needed time to just fill up his cup, right?
Yeah.
So we used the Alzheimer's Daycare Center down there off Bascom.
Yep.
And my grandma was like, there is nothing wrong with me. I am fine. I don't need to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
Yeah.
I was like, great, we're not going. I just have to go run an errand. And she'd get in the car, right?
Yeah.
Maggie,
Yeah.
I don't like it there. I'm so bored. I don't want to go. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Okay. And then we would get there and then she'd still say, I don't want to go. And the ladies would come out and take her inside and she would just go. And she was there as a volunteer. That's what I told her. You're just volunteering. She didn't know she was there for herself.
Right.
Right. We call them therapeutic lies, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They just go along with it. Right. I have to go to work. She doesn't know it's a Sunday. It's been great seeing you. I have to go to work now. She doesn't know it's a Sunday and then I've got to go do other things, right? But that does bring me, I want to talk a little bit about the caregiver, because I'm sure a lot of us are in those shoes, or will be potentially in those shoes, or they have a parent who's in denial who will eventually be in those shoes. Because it's an exhausting disease, I think. And it can be very long.
Yeah.
And it's progressive. It never gets better. It gets worse.
Yeah.
So what kind of resources should the caregiver be looking at to keep their cup full?
Yeah. So I'm going to say there's 3 or 4 things that are imperative a caregiver do. Number one, get as educated as possible about the disease. The more knowledgeable you are, the more prepared you'll be for what's coming down the pike. The second thing is you definitely need as much emotional support as possible. You need to take what I call some daily 10-minute timeouts, and support can come in all different forms. Support group, professional, community-based resource, friends, family, but I cannot stress enough the importance of building and establishing a support network. And clients will say to me, but I don't want to bother Mary with this all the time. So we want to have more people, right? There's the community resources, the faith-based resources, the professional resources. And you have to have an outlet for what you're going through. Statistically, caregivers, the statistics are high on caregivers who pass away before their loved one because of the stress and demands that this takes on the caregiver. The person with dementia, their brain is just going to go where it's going to go. You are trying to manage their reality, stay in your reality, and it wears on the caregiver. And you also want to start looking into care communities, get acquainted with home care agencies, because here's what we know. At some point, this disease is going to progress. And you're going to, one person cannot manage this disease from beginning to end. You will not survive it. And I don't know anyone yet who has solely been able to do this from beginning to end completely by themselves. No way. So we know you're going to need home care help. All right. So start getting acquainted with some home care agencies, start getting acquainted with care communities. I push a lot of my private clients to do that. I encourage that in my support groups, because when there's a crisis and you don't have things lined up, it is brutal to deal with. But if you remember talking to Kevin, home care, right? Oh, call Kevin. You have a relationship. You started a relationship. Kevin, I need such and such, versus going cold. So these are a lot of suggestions that I want people to line up their ducks ahead of time. And again, all of this is in my book. From this journey, from the beginning to end, I walk you through it hand in hand all the way. So a lot of this information is contained in the book in terms of, remember, you're just as important as the person you're taking care of, but it is a fine line between taking care of you and taking care of your caregiver. And it often tips very, 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 very badly. The caregiver's down here and the person with dementia's up here. And yet now your health is beginning to suffer. So I really encourage you to do the things that I suggested.
Yeah, and you're not going to be able to do all of those loving responses that Tami said. You're going to have this like short little fuse, and then you guys are going to wind each other up every day because you're going to be angry because you're exhausted and tired, and you don't have anybody to talk to that says, listen to what I had to do yesterday. You know, listen to this crazy story, right?
Exactly. Now, Maggie brought up something I want to bring up. Two things. One, and you're never alone. Truly, you feel you're alone. But this is where support groups are fantastic. You get to just verbalize what you're going through. And there's a lot of suggestions. Yep, I've been through that. We tried this and that. The other thing I want you to do, and again, I mentioned this in my book a lot, use your feelings and emotions to be of benefit to you. Don't use them against yourself. Don't judge yourself. Don't criticize. There's 3 questions I ask people to ask. What are my feelings trying to tell me? What is causing me to feel this way? What do I need to do differently to feel better? Those 3 questions will help you on this journey, no matter where you are in the phases of it. So what are my feelings telling me? What is causing me to feel this way? What do I have to do differently to feel better? 3 great questions to ask yourself to help monitor and manage this disease, so it's not at the expense of your physical, mental, and emotional well-being.
Absolutely. Okay, another question. I have an only daughter and I would like to avoid putting this all on her plate in the future. Should I end up going down this path, let alone even if she's willing, right?
Yeah.
Is long-term care insurance, those who are lucky or can afford to get it, worth looking into? Because care communities can be so expensive.
Maggie, you want to answer that from a legal standpoint?
Yes, no, maybe, it depends.
Yeah.
If you can, so the thing about long-term care insurance is, if you are lucky enough to get it when you can afford it, that's great.
Yeah.
Long-term care insurance is going to help keep you at home longer and bring in outside assistance to bring in the caregiver. And it might be beneficial for the spouse that's at home if there's, something like that. And you have to look at the policy itself to see if they will even cover a care community and at what level, because a lot of policies, like I said, they're not going to cover the cost of a community, but and a lot of people don't know this, even if you're in like an assisted living community, if you need medical help, you need somebody to come in 4 or 5 hours a day to help you specifically, you have to pay extra, right? You're just paying for the board and care. You're not paying for them. They're going to nickel and dime you for any time they come in and you need something, right? Oh, you need somebody to help you with your medication. That's an additional $500 a month or something. That's where long-term care insurance might help you, is having somebody come in and help with that one-on-one assistance. But again, all the policies are different. And so you have to really ask those questions when you're signing up for it, or if you already have it, go back and look at the policy, and how many hours are you going to get? And then you have to qualify. My grandparents had long-term care insurance, and it was a test that we tried to get them to fail, right? We don't want you to be really great at this test, Gramps. We want you to not be able to lift your arm and lift your leg and balance really well. And he's like, I'm going to do really good. And it's like, no, we're trying to get you more help, right? It's the principal in you. It's the colonel in you. You got to do great. It's like, we don't want you to do well on this test, right?
Yeah.
So you still have to qualify. Every year they're going to send somebody in and have you raise your arm and your balance and check your steps and see, well, how many hours can you really get?
Yeah.
So don't bank on long-term care insurance really as being the fail safe.
Right. So let's look at the options. So if you've already paid for long-term care and someone has dementia, you want to use that long-term care as much as possible for their care. If this is someone who's already paid into it, and now we have to what they call file a claim or open a claim. So that's with somebody who already has paid into it for years, and now we want to open a claim. Now you have a single daughter. You have one daughter. We have choices. We can hire what is called a geriatric care manager that you could interview now. If you should start going down the dementia path, we have a professional who can come in and manage your care for you and either team tag it with your daughter, but they're called geriatric care managers. The other thing is, here again, is the POA stuff, the power of attorney, right? Who would you want to make medical decisions on your behalf? If you don't want it to be your daughter, then we can name someone else to be the person. If we do that, then we also need to make sure you sign the HIPAA form. This is who they can talk to regarding your health, because if that form's not signed, doctors today can't necessarily relinquish any information. So you have choices on who we could choose to manage any care you might need if you go down this path, if you don't want to burden your daughter with it. If your daughter wants to do it, we need to educate her, but maybe again, we hire a professional geriatric care manager to do this for you. A fiduciary conservator, I mean, that's something I don't think we'd want to entertain at this point by any means. But again, there's options and there's choices.
And I just want to just touch on what Tami had said earlier. It's having the knowledge and because even if you're not ready for it now, something might happen. You know, there might be a slip, there might be a fall, there might be a hospitalization, and then you see a dip. And now you're ready, they can't come home. And then you're scrambling now to figure out what the next step was when you've done a lot of the research beforehand. So you have a better understanding of, what level of care do we need? Can I bring in home help? Is this something I can take off work for? I can't, so I need someone else to do it. So having sort of an idea of what your options are will make you feel a little bit less out of control when it happens, right? So you guys are all here. So now you have Tami as a resource. You have Deidre as a resource at the office, and me, and Justin, and everyone. So
and we look at the financial picture too, right? Because cost of care. Do you stay in California? Do you go to another state? Do you, I don't know where your daughter lives, but again, we have options. And I think you want to, at this point, explore what your options are so you feel in more control of whatever in anticipation of what could come down the pike.
All right, Tami, we have a couple of minutes left, but I want to ask you a couple of real life scenario questions. Okay.
Oh boy.
Okay. So I'm the dementia patient. I didn't write this check for $500. Someone at the bank is forging my signature. What do you say to this? What do you say when they're saying things like that?
I'm going to say, thank you for letting me know that. I'll look into it and I'll make sure that doesn't happen again, or I'll go to the bank on your behalf and we'll take care of this. To argue with you will be futile. So this is what's happening now. Let's go back to what Maggie said earlier. This is where now we put provisions in place, right? We have a relationship with the bank. We know who the bank tellers are. We know who the person manages, the branch manager, and my parent has dementia. And here again, we want to get you on a signature card, but somehow we have as much information as possible that you're included on. So when these situations occur, we'll take care of it. Because if you have a signature card and you're on these accounts, great, I'll walk into the bank and I'll take care of it. So, but we're not going to argue with it. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. Let me go to the bank and talk to them about this, right?
Okay. No one's going to make decisions for me. Okay.
Yep.
I get to make my own decisions. You can go now and don't ever come back. What do you say to that? That hurts my feelings, Tami.
Yeah. That's brutal, but it happens, right? I know you can make decisions and you're great at making decisions. And by no means, I need to apologize. If you feel that I'm taking decisions away from you, I want to apologize for that. And I want us to be a team. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. You're not going to go anywhere trying to argue or convince them. You've got to dive into their world and meet them where, what we call meet them where they are. And it's the validating. I'm apologizing for upsetting you, and I'll work on not doing that again. And then I'm going to use that distraction technique. Okay.
We've got let's say we have a son, Joe. Okay. We talk to Joe every day. And then I'm the dementia patient. I say, you know what? I'm really concerned because Joe hasn't called in a really long time. I really hope he's okay.
You know what? If you haven't heard from Joe, I need to give him a call and tell him you need to call your mother. She's very upset that she hasn't heard from you. And you call Joe and say, hey, Joe, mom doesn't remember, short-term memory loss, right? Yeah. You got to dive in their world. And as I'm doing this, Maggie, what do you feel being on the receiving end?
What am I validating? You're hearing everything I'm saying and you're not arguing with me.
Yeah.
Right? Well, Joe, you just talked to Joe.
Yeah. Right. Right.
We just called Joe 15 minutes ago, right?
Exactly. And then we have the daughter that's come by for 8 hours, spent the whole day there. And then mom calls the sister and says, I haven't talked to your sister in a while, right? Short-term memory loss. Okay, I'll bring that to so-and-so's attention.
Or these are the ones that hurt, I think, a lot is, hi, Mary, I see that you brought a friend with you and it's Joe. We know Joe. Joe's the brother, right?
Yeah.
Those hurt.
Yeah, that is painful. And again,
who are you? Where's my husband?
Yeah.
I don't know you.
Yeah.
Get out of my room.
Yep. I had a client last night, very emotional, sitting across the table from her husband. And he said, who are you? Do you know my wife? Very, very, very sad. And so you say, your name, and sometimes they click back in and sometimes they don't. So if they click back in, we're good. If they don't click back in, you might say, I do know your wife. She's a lovely woman. What do you love the most about her? And then get them to talk about who that is. And there is a slight chance then they make that connection. It will be very dependent on what they recall, what they don't recall. This happens when they're kind of in between stages. The disease progresses. They start questioning who you might be, but they're not quite there yet where they don't know you at all. And they have these little flashbacks. Oh, and then they come back into reality. So it's really kind of walking the path that they're on at the time that they're on it. It's kind of like living in the moment, wherever they are in that moment, because it can change in a dime. And then we go with them where they go.
Okay, so let's go back to one of the things you talked about in your presentation where we're giving people choices. Okay, I'm making dinner. And I've given you the choice between chicken and pasta. Yeah. And I said, I want chicken.
Yep.
And then you bring the chicken and I go, what is this?
Yeah.
I don't want chicken. I hate chicken.
Yeah. So this happens frequently. So I say, always have a backup plan. If they like grilled cheese sandwiches or they want something else, you say, okay, I'll cook something else. In other words, always have another simple meal as a backup plan, because that does happen all the time, right? What are you talking about? I made this chicken. You said this is what you wanted. Lo and behold, they changed their mind while you were cooking the chicken. So better not to argue. Just simply say, okay, we'll save it for next time, or maybe we'll have it later. And then again, but whatever the backup is, keep it very simple and something they like. Right?
Maybe it's just in case they change their mind again, right?
Yep. We just put it in the refrigerator and or they'll have it later that night, an hour later. But what you don't want to do is rub it in their face. Well, here's the leftovers that you didn't want when I cooked it, right? You just want to say, oh, listen, I'm in the mood for a snack. I'm going to nibble on some chicken. Would you like some?
Okay, well, I know we're almost out of time, so I wanted to thank Tami for being here, and we already have an idea for next time, because I know this is a hot topic. A lot of people are going through this. we're finding it's going to be more common just because people are living longer, and
Yep.
it's just what we're going to end up dealing with. So thank you, Tami, for being with us.
And thank you for
today.
having me.
Absolutely. And just so everyone knows, Wendy will send out an email with Tami's information. So if you have a specific question, you want to meet with her to go over your own specific situation, she'd be happy to do that. So send her an email, and also buy her book. I've read it. It's great. Like I said, it was very beneficial, even after the fact, thinking, oh, it would have been so helpful, right? And also, if you want to watch this again, or someone you know could benefit from it, respond to the email, and then we'll be able to send the recording to you next week. And then also, just so everyone knows, the next Ask the Expert will be Friday, August 19th. I'm going to have Mercedes from Darling Fisher. So it's all of the post-death planning that we're all avoiding. She's going to come and talk to us about that. And also the life care workshop, which we talk about some real life scenarios and making sure you have your documents in place and what does this all look like. Deidre and I will be doing that on August 17th at 1 o'clock. And then make sure you subscribe to our e-newsletter, because all of this information will be in the newsletter as well. So again, thank you everyone for joining us for today's Ask the Expert. Thank you, Tami. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
All right. Thank you, everybody.